Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. It's kind of wild out there right now, right? Like in the markets and the economy and everything. I was talking to our old pal Mickey the other day.
Oh, yeah.
Mickey
Of course, yeah.
always seems to have a good sense of what's going on. And he was telling me about how he's been like just buying up TSMC shares.
Wow.
Like just going crazy for them.
Really?
Yeah. And he says it's all about Taiwan. Like he's got this like unwavering faith in Taiwan, which I thought was kind of interesting because, a lot of the economic worries seem to be coming from, right here at home.
Yeah.
Good old US of A.
I mean, that's really interesting, right? Because it's like when you see these individual actions like that really shows,
Yeah.
a lot of people's sentiment, right? Like
Yep.
if someone's going that heavy into, a company in a specific region that kind of tells you where the uncertainty is or where people are looking for stability
Right.
outside of, their home markets.
Totally. And that's kind of what we're diving deep into today is like what is going on with the American economy? Because like you can't turn on the news these days without seeing something that makes you think like, maybe sequel stock up on instant noodles.
Right.
And from what you've brought to the table, it seems like there's like two big things that people are kind of like scratching their heads about.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from all the stuff that you sent me, I think two things really stood out to me. The first one is, just this kind of growing rift maybe between the U.S. and Canada. And a lot of it seems to stemming from these tariffs that have been put in place. And then the second thing that was really interesting to me was this whole like DOGE team thing with Elon Musk. And are they actually, making the government more efficient?
Right. Tariffs and DOGE.
Yeah.
That's sounds like a recipe for an interesting conversation.
Definitely.
So our mission today is to try and make sense of all of this stuff for you. Kind of distill it down to the essential information, making your head explode.
Right.
So where do we even begin with all of this?
I guess the U.S.-Canada thing is kind of a good place to start because they're like right next door, practically family.
I mean, and it's important too because I think it speaks to a bigger picture about global trade and where things are headed with the economy. So I think what's happening with Canada is a really good indicator of maybe some larger trends.
Yeah.
So the real kind of core issue here is that back in February of 2025, President Trump, he put these tariffs on Canadian goods.
Right.
And we're talking about a pretty substantial tariff here. We're talking about 25% on most imports and then 10% on energy resources.
25% on most things coming from Canada, that's
a lot.
That's more than just a slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
What was the reasoning behind that?
Okay.
So they were saying that there was, issues with illegal immigration and fentanyl coming across the border and that, this represented a threat to U.S. national security.
So they were basically saying like, hey, Canada, tighten up your border or we're going to hit you where it hurts.
Yeah, essentially using economic pressure to try and influence their border policies.
Which seems a little extreme when you consider how like intertwined our economies are.
Right, and that's where it gets really interesting because Canada's economy is hugely reliant on trade with the U.S. I mean, a huge portion, like 67% of their GDP is tied to trade with the U.S. So this isn't just like a, minor inconvenience. This is like a major blow to their economy. And it really affects a lot of different industries. But I think one that's particularly vulnerable is the auto industry because we have such an integrated supply chain.
Across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. So, companies like, let's say, Atlantis Manufacturing, they make auto parts up in Windsor, Ontario. Yeah. They're really facing a lot of uncertainty right now.
Yeah, 67%. That's wild. I mean, that's like saying, you know what, if your favorite coffee shop could no longer get coffee beans.
Exactly.
Like the whole operation shuts down.
Yeah, it's a huge dependence.
Yeah, and the auto industry is a great example because I can just imagine all of the logistical nightmares when you have parts that are crossing borders multiple times to make one car.
Right, exactly.
And to really highlight how much Canada relies on trade with us in 2024, they had a $63 billion trade surplus with the U.S.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And these tariffs are directly aimed at reducing that.
Right.
I mean, they retaliated pretty quickly and pretty significantly. So they put their own tariffs on U.S. goods to the tune of about 30 billion Canadian dollars.
Wow.
Which is about 20.7 billion U.S. dollars. So, and these target things like steel, aluminum, agricultural goods. And, there have been some temporary exemptions, especially for the automakers, so that they can, kind of minimize the disruptions in their supply chain.
Yeah.
But the tensions are still there.
I mean, that's that classic, like, tit-for-tat tariff thing, which never seems to really end well.
Yeah, it rarely does.
For anybody. And it's one thing when it's happening, countries across the world, but it's another thing when it's happening with your, next door neighbor.
Right.
And I think I even saw something where, like, the Canadian PM was weighing in on all of this.
Yeah. So Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney actually said that Canada no longer sees the U.S. as a reliable trading partner.
Wow.
Which is a pretty strong statement.
That's a big statement.
It is. And I think it really speaks to how much damage has been done to the relationship by these trade disputes.
Okay, so how does all of this tariff stuff, tie back into the overall, shaky feeling around the economy and like Mickey buying all the, TSMC stock?
Well, I think when you have these kind of trade disputes, it just injects a lot of uncertainty into the economic outlook, right? Businesses, they don't want to invest if they don't know what the tariffs are going to be like in the future.
Right.
Supply chains get disrupted, and ultimately it really hurts investor confidence. And, as we've seen many times before, when investor confidence takes a hit, the stock market tends to follow.
Okay, so tariffs equal uncertainty. Uncertainty makes investors nervous.
Yeah.
Nervous investors sell their stocks. Stock market goes down.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. Makes sense in a bad way.
Yeah, in a not good way.
And speaking of the stock market going down, wasn't there like a pretty big drop recently?
Yeah, so the S&P 500, which is, that benchmark index that tracks like 500 of the biggest companies in the U.S. So it's a pretty good indicator of, the overall health of the market.
Yeah.
It recently entered what's called a correction, which basically means it's dropped by about 10% from its peak, which was back on February 19th, 2025.
And the argument is that drop is directly tied to this uncertainty.
Exactly.
Around the tariffs.
Yeah.
So it's not just general like market jitters. It's like, no, this is directly because of these tariffs that are happening.
Yeah, people are drawing that connection pretty strongly.
And are investors worried about like an actual recession?
Yeah. I mean, that seems to be a big fear right now, is that this could lead to an economic slowdown, maybe even a recession, because of these trade wars, not just with Canada, but, also potentially with Mexico and China down the line.
Right.
So the worry is that these tariffs will cause inflation to go up because, import costs are higher. And then that could also lead to lower corporate profit.
Right, because then companies have to raise prices.
Exactly.
People can't afford things.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole thing just kind of
spirals.
Yeah, spirals downwards.
Yeah.
So it's like the economic equivalent of a bad hair day.
Yeah.
That just keeps getting worse.
That's a good way to put it.
And the experts are taking this seriously.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, there was a survey done by BofA Global Research, and they showed that there was the largest drop in U.S. equity allocation that they'd ever seen in March. And they said it was specifically because of worries about stagflation, which is, that combination of slow growth and high inflation that nobody wants.
Yeah, nobody wants that.
And they're also worried about these trade wars and kind of a sense that, U.S. economic exceptionalism might be coming to an end.
Right.
And even more concerning is that J.P. Morgan and Moody's Analytics, they both increased their predictions for a U.S. recession. So J.P. Morgan's now saying there's a 40% chance of a recession in the U.S., and Moody's is saying 35%, and both of them are specifically pointing to these tariffs.
40%, that's not great odds.
No, it's not.
You wouldn't want to play those odds in Vegas.
No, definitely not.
And wasn't there like a huge amount of value wiped out when the stock market went down?
Yeah. So the S&P 500 lost about $5.28 trillion in market capitalization.
Trillion.
Trillion, yeah, with a T.
That's just an insane amount of money.
It's mind-boggling.
It really is. Okay, so can we break down like the nuts and bolts of how tariffs actually cause this kind of reaction?
Right.
You mentioned inflation and lower profits.
Right.
But like, what is the actual chain of events that happens?
So basically, a tariff is like a tax on imported goods.
Right.
So right away, that increases the cost for businesses that are, bringing in those imports, whether it's raw materials or finished products.
Right.
So they have to pay more for the stuff they're bringing in. And then a lot of times those costs get passed along to consumers in the form of higher prices, which leads to inflation.
Right.
And then as prices go up, consumers start to reduce their spending.
Yeah. Because you can't buy as much stuff.
Exactly. Your money doesn't go as far.
Yeah.
So then, companies, their revenues go down, their profits take a hit.
Right.
And then businesses might even start to cut back on investments, cut back on hiring because they're worried that demand is going to go down.
Right.
And then that contributes to the economic slowdown. So it's like a ripple effect.
It's like if the price of flour suddenly went way up.
Yeah.
So now your local bakery has to charge more for their croissants and their cookies and whatever.
Exactly.
But then people don't buy as many pastries because they're more expensive.
Right.
So the bakery's profits go down.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's a whole chain reaction. And it seems like the Trump administration wasn't really super concerned about the stock market dip.
Yeah, there was definitely a sense that, they weren't panicking about it. And their argument was that ultimately, these tariffs are going to make the U.S. wealthier.
Right.
Which doesn't really jive with what we're seeing in the markets.
No, it doesn't at all. And that disconnect is just going to make investors more nervous.
Yeah, I think so.
Because it's like if the people at the top aren't worried, then you start thinking are they not seeing something that I'm seeing?
Exactly. Yeah, what are they missing? Why are they so calm about this?
Exactly. It's like the captain of a ship saying, don't worry about the storm while the waves are crashing over the deck.
Right.
You can be a little nervous.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned some specific sectors being hit hard by these tariffs. Let's dig into those a little bit, starting with autos, because it's obviously a big one with the Canada trade.
Yeah, so the auto industry is facing higher production costs because of the tariffs on Canadian and Mexican auto parts. And the supply chains are so interconnected that a lot of times a vehicle will cross borders multiple times during the manufacturing process.
Why?
So every time it crosses the border, there's another tariff added on.
Ouch.
Yeah, so we've already seen GM and Ford.
Yeah.
Their stock prices have dropped. GM's down over 7%. Ford's down almost 4%.
Wow.
And some analysts are saying that North American auto production could drop by, as much as 20,000 vehicles per day.
20,000 a day?
Which is a lot.
It's huge.
It is, yeah.
What about the tech sector? Because they tend to be pretty sensitive to, global trade stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So you've got companies like Apple, Intel, Qualcomm.
Yeah.
And they have, significant sales in China. So, for a lot of these companies, China makes up over 10% of their revenue.
Wow.
So they're facing higher component costs because of, tariffs on electronics.
Right.
And also the potential that, sales in China could go down if the trade tensions escalate. So it's like a double whammy for them.
So it's not even just stuff coming into the U.S. It's like other countries could retaliate.
Yeah.
And then we lose access to those markets.
Right. Exactly.
Ouch. Okay, what about energy? I mean, we get a lot of energy from Canada.
Yeah, Canada is actually the largest source of U.S. crude oil imports.
Okay.
So back in 2024, they were providing about 23% of our crude oil imports.
Wow.
So these tariffs on Canadian energy that could lead to, higher oil and gas prices.
Yeah.
In the U.S.
Which is not what we want.
No, definitely not.
Okay. What about healthcare? Because they rely on a lot of imported stuff too, don't they?
Yeah, healthcare is a big one because you've got, imported drugs, medical devices.
Right.
So the tariffs on those goods could lead to higher prices for, medications equipment that could squeeze the profits of healthcare companies.
Yeah.
And it could also increase costs for patients. So it's a situation where, healthcare is directly impacted by these trade policies.
Right. So it's not just a business thing. It's like people's actual health could be affected.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So it feels like basically every major sector is feeling some kind of pain from these tariffs.
It seems like it.
And the fact that nobody knows how long this is going to last must make it really hard for businesses to, plan for the future.
Exactly. I mean, we don't know how long these tariffs are going to be in place.
Right.
You don't know if there's going to be more retaliation from other countries. Businesses are already dealing with supply chain problems.
Right.
And we just don't know what the long-term effects are going to be on these different industries.
Right.
So it just creates a lot of volatility and uncertainty.
Yeah. And it's not just corporations and businesses
that
are affected. I remember seeing something about how much this could potentially cost, like, the average American family.
Yeah, there were some estimates that said these tariffs could end up costing American households over $800 per year.
$800.
Which is a lot of money.
That's a lot of money for a lot of people.
It is, yeah.
And the Federal Reserve, they're keeping an eye on all of this, right?
Yeah, they are. They've expressed some concern about the risk of inflation because of these tariffs.
Right.
You know, if import prices go up, that can push inflation up.
Right.
And that could potentially delay any interest rate cuts that they're planning, because they might want to wait and see how these policies are going to affect prices before they, loosen things up a bit.
So it's like a possible interest rate hike on top of everything else.
Yeah.
Ouch. You did mention one interesting detail about, like, the energy sector possibly benefiting from this.
Yeah, so it's kind of a mixed bag, right? Because while consumers might be paying more for gas because of the tariffs on Canadian oil, the domestic energy producers in the U.S., they could actually benefit because they can sell their oil at a higher price. So it's like, some people win, some people lose.
Right.
And a lot of times it seems like the consumers are the ones who end up paying the price.
It's like a big game of economic whack-a-mole. You fix one thing, another thing pops up.
Exactly.
Now all of this is happening against the backdrop of, some other global stuff, right? It's not happening in isolation.
Right. There are other factors at play here. So there were already signs that the U.S. economy was slowing down.
Okay.
Even before these tariffs were fully implemented. And, President Trump even made some comments about a possible recession, which actually caused the stock market to drop even further back in early March.
It's never good when the president says the R word.
No, not really.
And then there's also the trade tensions with China.
Yeah, that's been an ongoing concern for a while now. And the World Bank, they're projecting slower global economic growth.
Okay.
So they're saying it's going to be at about 2.7% for 2025, 2026.
Okay.
So that's a pretty slow rate of growth, which suggests that, there are some headwinds affecting economies all over the world. And then there are also, certain financial indicators that have historically predicted recessions, things like inverted yield curves.
Yes.
And those have been, kind of flashing some warning signs.
Right. So it's not just one thing.
No.
It's a whole bunch of things.
Exactly. It's a very complex situation.
Coming together to make everybody feel kind of uneasy.
Yeah, and uncertain about the future.
Okay. Well, that's a lot to think about on the trade front. So let's switch gears to something completely different but equally interesting.
Okay.
Elon Musk's DOGE team.
Right, the DOGE team.
And their mission to shake up government efficiency.
Yeah.
I just want to give another shout out to Mickey from Mickey to Life. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip&Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it.
The name alone is enough to make you raise an eyebrow.
It is a very interesting name.
It is very interesting. And I can't believe that something that started as like an internet meme.
I know.
Is now like making decisions.
Yeah.
In Washington.
Yeah.
But okay, putting the name aside, the goal sounds, great.
Right.
Who doesn't want a more efficient government?
But they've been getting a lot of negative press, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. I mean, right from the start, they've been hit with quite a few criticisms.
Like what?
Well, for example, one of the members of the DOGE team, Marco Velez, he had to resign back in February of 2025.
Okay.
Because of some racist comments that he had made on social media in the past.
Wow.
So that immediately raised questions about, the quality of the people being brought onto this team.
Yeah, you would think that if you're trying to improve government, you'd be extra careful about who you bring on board.
Yeah, you would think that.
And it sounds like they've also run into some legal trouble that's making it harder for them to do their job.
Yeah, so a federal judge actually issued an order that restricts members of the DOGE team from sharing sensitive data from the Treasury Department's payment system.
Okay.
With outside parties.
Okay.
And the concern there was, that this financial information is very confidential.
Mm-hmm. And they didn't want it to be misused. So.
Right.
Which, makes sense.
Yeah, you don't want people having access to that information.
Right.
But then it also kind of ties their hands.
Exactly.
If they're trying to really dig into the details.
Right. It makes it much harder for them to actually scrutinize spending
right.
and identify waste and fraud if they can't actually get access to all of the information.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack with like gloves and a blindfold on.
Yeah, a very difficult task.
What else has been causing a stir? I think I saw something about like department closures.
Yeah.
And major staff cuts, which obviously is a big deal.
Yeah, huge. So there have been discussions about, potentially reducing the number of government employees quite significantly, and even closing down entire departments.
Wow.
Like the Department of Education was mentioned.
Okay.
So these proposals have obviously caused a lot of concern.
Yeah.
Because people are worried about, essential public services.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to them?
And the people who rely on those services.
Right.
Yeah, okay. And given all of Elon Musk's other, business ventures, there have been some questions about, potential conflicts of interest.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's not exactly a neutral party when it comes to,
right.
government contracts and regulations.
Yeah. I mean, his company is SpaceX, Tesla.
Yeah.
They have billions of dollars in government contracts.
Wow.
So there's definitely a concern that, he might be using his position to benefit his own businesses.
Right.
And there's also the issue that, he's not an elected official.
Right.
But he has a lot of influence over the government.
Right.
So it raises questions about, accountability and transparency.
Yeah, someone who's not accountable to voters.
Right.
Having that much power, that's a little worrying.
It is, yeah.
And even some experts in, government efficiency are kind of like, not so sure about this whole DOGE team thing.
Yeah, there's definitely some skepticism out there.
Like, what do they say?
Well, some experts are saying that just focusing on cutting spending and cutting personnel might not actually be the best way to improve government efficiency.
Right.
They're saying, you need to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
You need to think about how to actually make programs more efficient and effective.
So you can't just like slash budgets willy-nilly and expect everything to be fine.
Exactly. You need to have a plan.
Right.
You need to understand how these programs actually work.
Okay, so it's not all negative.
Right.
There must be some arguments in favor of what the DOGE team is trying to do.
Yeah. I mean, their supporters would say that, cutting spending, reducing the size of the government, those are good things.
Right.
And those could lead to a more efficient government, less wasteful spending.
And Musk is known for, thinking outside the box.
Yeah, he's a very innovative guy.
So maybe he can bring some of that to the government.
Right. That's the hope.
Which is, usually not known for being very innovative.
No, not really.
And I think the idea of, streamlining government, getting rid of some of the bureaucracy.
Right.
That's something that I think most people can agree on.
Yeah, I think so.
No matter what side of the aisle you're on.
Yeah, cutting through the red tape, making things simpler, more efficient.
Okay, so you dug into some specific examples of waste that the DOGE team says they found. And I'm looking at this Asmongold TV transcript. It's some pretty crazy stuff.
It is. Yeah, some of this is just like mind-blowing.
So their big goal is to reduce the deficit by $1 trillion.
Yeah, that's their overarching goal.
Which is a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
And they want to do that by cutting waste and fraud.
Right.
And their initial target is a 15% reduction in spending.
Right. So bringing it down from about $7 trillion to $6 trillion a year.
Still a huge number.
Yeah,
but
still a huge number. But
better than $7 trillion, I guess.
A little bit better, yeah. And they've even set this crazy goal of like cutting waste and fraud by $4 billion a day.
$4 billion a day.
A day.
That's insane. Okay, so what are some of the concrete examples that they found?
Well, one of the first things they mentioned was this online survey.
Okay.
So it was just 10 questions.
Right.
Something you could probably whip up on SurveyMonkey in like 5 minutes.
Right.
And this survey cost the government almost $1 billion.
$1 billion.
Almost $1 billion.
For a 10-question survey.
And the kicker is that there was no real plan for what to do with the data.
So they spent $1 billion to just collect data and then do nothing with it.
Pretty much.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
Okay, that's one example.
Yeah.
What else did they find?
Okay, so get this. They found a physical mine in Pennsylvania.
A mine?
A mine, yeah, like underground tunnels.
Like, you're not kidding?
No, I'm not kidding.
Like, this is real.
It's real.
A mine full of paper.
Full of paper, and we're not talking about like, a small little mine.
Okay.
This mine has 22,000 filing cabinets.
Wow.
that are packed with 400 million paper documents.
This is real.
And all of this is related to the government's retirement process.
Like a mine full of retirement paperwork.
Yeah, pretty much. And a lot of this stuff dates back to like the 1950s.
Wow.
And they've just been adding to it ever since.
So we've gone from, digital to the cloud, and they're still using a mine full of paper.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so how inefficient is this system?
So inefficient, they found some retirement cases that were so big that they had to be moved around on pallets.
Like wooden pallets?
Yeah, like you'd use in a warehouse.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so the paperwork takes months to process. Anywhere from like 6 to 9 months.
Okay.
And the system can only process like 8,000 retirements a month.
Wow.
Which isn't very many.
No, it's not. And so what's their solution?
So they want to digitize the whole process.
Okay. Which, seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, seems like a good idea.
And they're saying that if they do that, it'll only take a few days to process a retirement.
From 6 to 9 months
to
a few days.
Yeah. So that's a pretty significant improvement.
Yeah,